Okay, so I'm going to show you the material editor because that is where we're going to mostly be working in this class. So first, let's make a material. So if we go in here in this new folder I created called materials, we right click, and here you have a bunch of different options to create an asset. You can go right here and hit material, or you can go down here to materials and textures, and they will show you materials. But then there's also things like material functions, instances, layers, blends, parameter collections. We're going to mostly be talking about these three: material, material function, and instances. So here we'll just create a material. We will call it test material. Actually, we'll just do test, and then we'll underscore it in the back with MMAT, which stands for master material. We'll talk more about that next week, but when you're handling a material, you will always put MMAT. So let's right click on it, and this is the material graph editor. This is your outputs that when you start playing around with these little nodes, you'll start plugging them into here. So you'll have inputs for base color, metallic, specular, roughness, anisotropy, emissive color. These two grayed out ones are for opacity, normal, tangent, world position offset, tessellation and displacement, subsurface, ambient occlusion, pixel depth offset. All these different things will be used. And then this overall is the material. So if you click on this, you'll actually see these options for your materials. If you unclick on it and you click on something else, other options will pop up. Like say if I type in texture sample. So I click on here, it changes to the actual options for a texture. But I don't want that. So let's kind of go through a little bit of this. So here you have your save button, your browse asset option. So say if you're selecting this and you are here again, say maybe we're in this geometry section. If we click on this browse to asset, it browses back to the material itself. Browse to asset is actually very, very helpful, especially if you have 100 different assets and you're trying to figure out where's this one material. This points you right to that. There's also search, so you can always search inside of the actual graph itself. Once we start making more complex materials, this is going to help you out a lot trying to find a very specific node. Home and cleanup. So home goes to the actual home of the canvas where the material is. Cleanup will actually clean up any unused expressions or nodes. So say if something's not plugged in and we just have it there and we don't realize that it's just taking up space, you hit cleanup and it will delete everything. Like an example is, let's do another texture sample. Let's do throw two of them in here and we'll just plug this one in. Of course, there's going to be an error, but if we hit cleanup, boom, deletes the ones that aren't connected to the material itself. That way it's a little bit of housekeeping. Here we have connectors. So say if we hit Z and we go back, turn off connectors, and it takes off all this extra information and just kind of keeps it very simple. But I want to see all the options. Then we have live preview. Doesn't really change anything right now, but once we start putting in effects that actually require motion and real-time options, this is necessary. Same thing with live nodes, live updates, and then you can also hide unrelated things if you want to. Stats, which is going to be down here. And everything else, you won't really need to worry more about platform stats and preview nodes and all these other things just because right now we're just focusing on this. So here, let's go into the material options. So here we have things like physical material. So right now we're not going to be talking about physical materials, but once you get further into a production pipeline, you might have an audio team. And audio teams, what they'll do is they'll create these things called physical materials, which are materials that will give off physical attributes, more or less physical sounds. So say if you have a wood, a stone, or a metal, they'll create a sound. Like say if you hit it or shoot it, it will make a ting or a bang or whatever sound that wood or any other material give off. You would go in here and you'd select it. So say if we make a metal, you go in here, type in your physical asset for metal, and then it will clink. And then if you want to, change it to wood, and it will actually make the bang like how a wood sound would make. Here is the general material settings. So right here where it says surface, You can actually change things to deferred decals, which we'll go over later on. Light functions for how we handle certain lighting objects. Volumes, you can actually change a material into an actual volume for any other particular effect. Post process, which we will actually go over a little bit later on. This is more for if you have a post process volume, you can actually apply a specific material to do certain things. Maybe you want to change it so that when you walk into this volume, the entire view of the player turns red or maybe black and white for an effect. You can also do other things like creating your own custom sharpening, your custom bloom, any other little particular effects that you want the camera to affect, you can do it there. And finally, you can also do user interface materials as well. But we're not going to go over that. That's more for if you want to later on go into the user interface aspect of game development. Blending modes is for how a material will affect other things inside the scene. So currently, if you're just doing a normal material, it'll just remain opaque or non-see-through. Masked is for objects that are cut out. So it won't actually create a see-through material. It will just completely not render something that is shown. Here we see that opacity mask is actually showing up now as an option to plug into. This is only going to be for a opacity mask of being black or white. So how opacity is handled in materials, if the texture you're using has white, it will render what is white. But if you have black on there, it will not render that. This is very useful for maybe creating a cloth that has cutouts in it, or maybe a decal that has lettering on it or something, and you want to have it moved, or even graffiti, you would have that. If you want to have things kind of blend and there's like more of a softer transition, then you would use something like translucency. Translucency just brings in the opacity, and there you will have grayscale values. So this is great for glass or anything that will blend better. Other options that will pop up now is translucency. So you can change how lighting is handled. Like right now, you only have your color and emissiveness for this, but you can also change things like here we'll actually add a normal map value. This actually adds in your roughness and metalness values. Same thing here. They actually will, when you highlight over this, will actually give you an option of like what this would be great for. So for this forward shading one, we'll actually give you good options for glass and water. Here is also the same thing, but it would also make this thing more efficient. So it's very blurry. It won't give you too crazy of details, but it's great for glass and water. Other things like volumetric directional will just only take in the normal map information. This one will just give you base color. So it's just great for a simple blend. You can also turn on things like screen space reflections, where depending on what the camera has in the frame of itself will affect the reflections. And then there's a bunch of other options down here as well. So let's go back up here and change it back from translucent to, actually let's do additive and modulate. So additive and modulate. So additive, what is used for is for blending background colors together. So it will add over and over and over again. This would be actually great if you're doing VFX. Same thing for modulate. So modulate will do the same thing, but you're going to need certain other assets as well, like emissive color and ambient occlusion by how it's blended. And then let's go back to opaque. So let's go down to shading model. So shading model, this will create, Unreal Engine has a lot of pre-created materials for things, such as subsurface, skin, clear coat, foliage, hair, cloth, eyes. Each one of these will have its own built-in options under the hood. That way we don't have to worry about always having to try and figure out what the options are. It will all create something specifically for it, as well as have it completely optimized so that your performance won't be hit too hard. Now, just because these things are optimized doesn't mean that you can also have performance hits with it. This just gives you a base performance that's very easy to use. Here we have two-sided, which right now you don't see anything, but if you have a flat plane, it will actually now render the other side. Because in Unreal Engine, if you have what you would call a one-side object like a plane, there's only going to be one natural side. The other side is going to be invisible, so it's not going to render. If you want it to render, you would have to turn on two-sided. Now, what this does is it will actually duplicate the mesh and actually double your try counts. So only use this very sparingly. Don't try and throw this on everything. So we'll turn that back off. This is for material attributes. So right now it will actually have this as one single material attribute, but if you want to, you can actually go in and this is mostly for layers. So you can go in and add a layer function and actually really break down and make your own material if you want. But we're not going to go into that just yet. And then we have ray tracing shadows. So if we had ray tracing turned on, shadows would be affected in a different kind of way by how ray tracing works in their rendering settings. You can actually turn it on and off inside of materials in case maybe a certain material or an object doesn't need that crazy amount of shadows. You can turn it on and off here. And then here we have subsurface profiles. So subsurface scattering is handled through the material, but also through another option called subspace, or sorry, screen space. So screen space is the same thing like we were doing before when it comes to reflections. Whatever's in scene will be affected. So if we turn the camera, it's going to change how the subsurface stuff works. And then you can also create profiles for how the material is going to change and work. Here we have other options as well. This is mostly for if you're going to be doing decal response. So when we get into decals, you can actually change it so that it will only have either the color in normal, color roughness, a lot of other different options instead of just having one object to blend in. Changing for how LODs or levels of details are transitioned. These are a lot of other options that we might not even go into. So let's go further down. Here we're going to have things like, right here actually, tessellation. So when we get further into the class for tessellation and displacement, this is where you would actually turn on these options. So if we hit this and hit, say, flat tessellation, it actually turns on our displacement and tessellation options. And then you can always hit this little arrow, and this, what this does is it actually will bring it back to a default option, whatever the default was set previously. And then here are some light mass options for how you, if you want to have the color of the material affect the scene itself, you can adjust this. Let's see. And that's kind of a very, very quick overview of these detail ones. We'll go further once I get into each lesson. I'll kind of go over what's going to be changed and what's going to be used for each material that we're going to create. So on this side is in the current library of Unreal Engine's material editor, every single node that you can use, whether it's math, whether it's a creative node that does a specific feature, it's all here. You can search for it. You can type it in if you want to. You can even go to the category if it's either a function or an expression. If you even want to, if you hit right click, it actually will bring it up. And then you can just type it out there. Thing to note is that this this menu right here is not context sensitive, but if you do it here, it's context sensitive. So what that means is whatever this is plugged into will only show you nodes that work with this specific node. So right now I have a texture sample one. Only things that work with texture samples will be shown here. So let's delete that. Some other quick shortcuts are if you hit 1 and left click into any of this grid, we'll create a scalar, a single scalar node. So this will only have one channel of information. So this one single value. So you can do 1, 2, whatever option you want to. If you do 2, it brings up a 2 value. Same thing with 3 and 4. So some other quick and simple shortcuts are M for multiply, D for division, A for addition, and sadly, S does not do subtract. It actually does a scalar parameter. So it's the same thing as this 1 value, but it creates what you would call a parameter. So when we start going into material instances, a parameter, when you click on the material instance, will actually have a little value and a little scale node or a little slider value that you can move and adjust. Something like, say, this. So if we want to, we can change it to like roughness. And then when I make a material instance, you'll see a value for roughness, and then you'll see this little value that you can adjust the roughness for. So let's delete that. So you just actually have to hit subtract, and there you go. There's also L for lerp, which lerp is a shorthand for linear interpolation. So what that means, it's a blend between two objects in a linear fashion. So you would have an A option, like say, we'll do black, and then B for white. And then you would have this third option, which is your alpha. So from a black to white value, it will blend between these two options. So say if we actually put a gray, it will actually blend the white and the black to make a gray. If we do a white, it will only show what is the B option. And if we do a black option, it will only do the A option, because in this case, A stands for black and then B stands for white, or A is 0 and then B is 1. So let's go back that. Then we have O for 1 minus, which 1 minus is, it inverts a grayscale value. So whatever, say if we bring in this and it's black, if we click on this, it actually would make it red, but really what it does is it makes it white. It's only doing this because it naturally handles channel information. So the first channel it does is red channel. Let's see if we do this, 3 channels, boom, white. So when you do a 3 colored value, red, blue, green, if it's black, it will actually do the full 3 values, which is white. And then it'll do vice versa if you do the opposite as well. Another one is U, which creates what you call a texture coordinate node. So when we do T, it brings up a texture sample, and you'll have these 3 other node options: UV, texture, and then MIP bias. MIPs are, if you know what LODs are, which is the distance of how far the player and camera is to an object, it optimizes the size. So say we have a 2K texture, 2048 texture. If we are up close to whatever that object is, it will show the full 2048 texture. When we go further back, it will start actually shrinking the texture size down to 1024, and then further down 512 until it gets to, you can almost not see the object at all. It will have it at like 16 by 16 resolution. That's how you would adjust your MIPS for it. But here is the texture coordinates node. So you would plug this into your UVs, and then you can adjust the tiling of the actual asset. So you can, right now it's only tiling once, which is just whatever the texture is, the texture is. If we do 2, it will double it, 3, 4, and then say when we go into other blending nodes, if you have, say, a second UV set that we created in, say, Maya or Max or Blender, you can actually choose how the texture coordinate will affect the actual UV set. So right now, this would be at the default UV sets, and then if you have a second UV set, you do to 1, and then your other UV sets, say you have a third one, it will use the second one, because how UVs are is UVs are counted from 0. So default, it's 0, our second UV set's 1, and then a third UV set would be 2. And then if you want to, you can even mirror your up or down or your U or V sections. And then the last thing I should probably go over is once you start plugging in some things, like say, we'll do some basic color, because I don't have any textures just yet. Let me adjust that, boom. Then let's throw in some roughness, and let's throw in some metalness. So right now we have a material. So let me go back and I'll hit save. If I change this, let's say to a blue, you'll see this thing that says shader compiling. So when you're working with a material, when you change something, it will actually have to take some time to load the material. So like right now, it still shows red because I haven't saved it. So if I hit this, it's trying to compile the information and it'll show red. But then I hit save, it will actually adjust it and hit apply already and move and adjust it to be blue or lilac purple. If say cyan, maybe I don't want to save it yet and I just want to test it out, you just hit apply. So it won't save the material, but it will just adjust the value itself. See, right now it's still thinking, and this little star right here will show that it's not saved yet. So maybe I want to just revert it and not have to waste time saving. So it's back to blue. Hit save again, but this time it will actually apply the changes and then bring it back to that other color. Now, the thing to watch out for is once we start getting into more complex shaders, shader compiling, sometimes you just saw it like at 50. Sometimes it can go to 1,000. I've actually, when I've done a change, when I have an object in here that uses, say I have one material and it's used by 1,000 objects in 10 different levels, it's going to compile thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and it takes forever. And because it's trying to think and it's trying to change all these materials at the same time, it actually could slow down, if not crash, your level instance. So be very wary of when you start changing and editing things. But I'll show you a workaround for that in this next week's lesson. So this is kind of a very rough overview of the Unreal Engine UI and the Material Editor UI. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show you very quickly how to import textures as well as you do use this channel packing tool. If you don't want to, you can always try it in a different program such as Photoshop, or if you are comfortable, Substance Designer maybe. So what we'll go in here is the Megascans website. It's all online. There's no need to download a Megascans program. You do have to create a login, so I have my personal login. I'll go into surfaces, and this will show you every single surface that they have scanned and or created. I'm gonna have some fun, and let's do lava. They aren't really gonna have a specific lava material, but let's go with, what is a good one? Yeah, let's do this one, this lichen cover one. So here you can actually go through the different types of renders because there's going to be different options that you can do. We are not going to do 8K resolution because nothing in games does 8K at this point. An 8K texture would probably be like half of a gigabyte anyways. So let's do the lowest we can do, which is 2K. You can actually go in here and actually change the export options. So we're only going to be dealing with the texturing ones. So the problem right now is everything's going to be in JPEG, which you can either only choose JPEG or EXR. And EXR is a very file-heavy structure that actually deals with bits. So a normal texture will be 8-bit, which is only going to have the basics of 3 channels. EXRs are 32-bit, so they're going to hold light information. So they're going to hold a very dark version and a very light version. So it's very uncompressed. It's going to be very big in terms of file size. So we're just going to do JPEG. Very simple. Now, I'm not going to knock you guys for just keeping these things JPEG, but if you are going to be doing any texture authoring or any other kind of changes, it's best to do Targa. So here we have our albedo. We're going to be doing normal. We're going to be doing displacement, AO, metalness, roughness. We don't need any of these transmission, brush, opacity, fuzz, translucency, because we don't need any of these options. Right now, we aren't going to be doing anything with these models since we're not going to be doing any model downloads. So we'll hit back, and then we'll hit download. So it's going to wait a little bit, and it's going to download. Show in folder. So we have this. So we're going to extract, go in here, and here we have our files. So no matter what displacement, because it is such a detail-oriented map, it's going to actually save as an EXR file, but it will also actually create a JPEG file as well. This is more towards if you want to take this displacement and bring it into, say, a 3D modeling program that can actually apply displacement to a mesh and actually create a 3D object out of it, you would use this kind of file. but we're not going to need that. So here we have our channel packing tool. Here we have our options. So let's grab our ambient occlusion, throw that in the red channel. Here we have our roughness. Let's throw that in the green channel. And then right now there actually isn't a metal in this map because there's no metal because it's not a metal material. So you can actually leave that blank and it actually will just generate it as black. So it's taking its time and it's going to make this very weird colored map. It looks very similar, but that's what it is. And then you can actually change like the actual size and actually zoom in if you want to, but we'll do center and stretch the image. You can change all these little options. And then once you feel like you're ready, just hit pack image, save. And then if you want to, we can go back to our downloads, go into our rock lava. I'll select on this and it's going to make a very weird name for it. 2K. Just change this to ORM. And then you can change it as any other type you want to, but I'm going to do .tga, which is the short form handle for Targa. So hit save, and boom, we have ourselves a Targa file. I don't want to have this weird name because when you import in an object, it's going to take the name that's already on the file and save it there. So we'll do and change it to lava rock, no space. Take out the 2K because we don't need to worry about the actual texture size in the name. It's going to be shown when we highlight over the object. So let's click on this. We'll change our albedo to ALB. And then our normal. Change that to N. So we have our 3 objects. So we'll go in here. We'll go back and just for cleaning sake, we'll make a textures folder. So let's click in here. You click on this and go all the way up to import, and it will actually show you the directory where it's going to import the file to. So click on import. We'll go to our downloads, and then we'll go in here, and then we'll select our 3 because you don't have to just select one at a time. You can actually select all 3 of them. It's going to take its little time. It's going to bring these in, and boom. Now, let's save. If you take these objects and bring them into our material that we had just created, you're going to notice one problem. So say you did this in Substance Designer or whatever program else. Let's bring these guys in. You're going to notice 2 things. One, you're going to notice that our normal map is now blue. The reason for that is Unreal Engine has its own compression settings for things like your color map. If you have a grayscale map, it'll actually show it on here, and normal map. The reason why it turns blue is it takes the blue channel and it adjusts it from being a -1 to 0 to -1 to 1. It basically allows the normal map options to be scaled, because in Unreal Engine you can actually take a grayscale value and you actually can multiply it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. It doesn't just stop at say 0 to 1 or multiplication's sake. 0 times anything turns it to 0 or nothing. So say if we have a value in here like our ambient occlusion and we want to make it darker, we can times it by 0 and actually make it darker. Or if we want to brighten it, we can times it by 1, 2, or any other number and actually make it brighter. Same goes for our normal. You can actually adjust the intensity and change the values higher than it needs to be. Though I wouldn't recommend going too far ahead, because when you change the intensity of a normal map, it starts adding really weird compression and light map issues. So let's start plugging these in. So we'll plug in our base color. We'll plug in our normal map. And we will take our red channel, which is our roughness, our green channel, which is our... Actually, no, I'm dumb. Take our red channel, which is our ambient occlusion, and our green channel, which is our roughness. And we don't really have to worry too much because by default, it actually makes the metallic, it actually makes it black automatically, so we don't have to plug it in. It's only unless we actually have a value. So let's take a look. It looks very good. It does noticeably look a little too shiny for what I'm thinking of. And that reason is because when ORM maps naturally are imported in, they have to be changed in one way, which is we have to uncheck this option. So sRGB is a type of compression. There's two compression options. There is linear and sRGB. So sRGB is the normal 0 to 255 value that we always see. In the middle is going to be gray, on 0 is going to be black, and then on 255 it's going to be white. Then there's an option known as linear, which it takes the mathematical linear function, which basically doesn't keep it at middle. It actually starts slowly transitioning, like it makes the black value on the left, and then it slowly turns gray, and it doesn't hit the middle, and then it slowly goes from this gray mid value to white over a longer period of time, like how linear values are changed. That's how we handle our roughness and our metal values. So when you're doing sRGB, like say for color, we don't do linear for it. It's gonna, if we do linear for the albedo, it's actually gonna change it in the way we don't want it to be. But for how roughness and all these other values are, which normally if you have a linear value, it's usually handled with the two other channels. But since we're compressing it down, it actually will compress the values. So what we need to do is we need to unclick. And what it does is it now turns this image to linear. So it actually breaks out the two channels that we just put in, or three channels when we have it in, and actually will uncompress them into a linear value. Problem is that because we dragged it in, it actually made our sampler type to color. And you can't just change it to linear because it actually messes up. So what we do is we delete it. We go back now and we plug it in. And it actually will now show linear color because it's changed it from an sRGB to a linear value. So let's do it again. We'll do our ambient occlusion and we will do our roughness now. So now it's actually flatter. It's not as shiny as it was before. It's actually showing what we wanted it to be. That was the thing for a long time when I first started learning how to texture in when it comes to like say Substance Designer, Substance Painter, and bringing it into Unreal Engine. I started noticing all my textures looked very weird and they were different than how they looked in the viewport in Painter. So I was like, why is that? And it's because when I was doing channel packing, I did not unclick sRGB. So here we actually have the actual value. If we took this into Substance Designer Painter, which they automatically already have the channels separated and linearized, there you go. So this is the basics of how to actually bringing in texture maps and setting them up inside of the material editor. So we'll hit save, everything's now saved, and we can actually close out the file now. Okay, so now that you've created your lava material, I've actually kind of thrown it in the level already. What you can do is to apply a material to an object. It's very simple. You just go in, you drag and drop. And Unreal Engine knows whatever object that actually has a material slot, whatever you drag it over something, it will actually try to slot it to that object. It's very context sensitive, so make sure that you know where you're dragging. A thing to note is that, say, if you are dragging in something that already has a material, like say, if we go into our third person material, BP, where is it at? Actually, yes, here it is, our mannequin. Say we go into the character, we go to our mesh, and we see that we have our mannequin. So our mannequin, if we drag him in, he has a material already to him. So here we have two slots. We have one for the body and one for his little chest logo that he has right here. To note that it will already have these materials set up. If you want to, you can actually change the material by just going into where you have your material saved, and then you can drag them in and change it. Though, again, when you apply a material like this, it will take a little bit of time. It will actually do the shader compiling. And here you actually have the material now applied to Manny. To note, though, it will not change what the material is unless you actually go into the material the characters option. So if I drag in another version of this guy, he'll be the same. It's only when I click in here, and it's going to be a little different since this is a skeletal character mesh, but you'll see your material slots. So if you want to completely change the character's material forever, so that whenever you drag it in, it will always have that. You go in here, you just drag that over, and then you would hit save. And then that will actually change the character's material. So let's revert it. We'll go back and hit this little magnifying glass to go back to where the materials are. And then we'll just drag it back in again, and boom, he's back to normal. Hit save, and you're good to go. So also, I actually wanted to show you guys another little quick trick. So say you want to duplicate something very quickly, but you don't want to have to hit copy and hit paste. If you hold down Alt and you drag, so if you move something within one of these directions, it actually will duplicate it, but it will only duplicate it once. You have to re-click Alt again and then drag, and it will duplicate it. So now you have 3 objects very quickly duplicated. It keeps the same exact transformation options. So if it was rotated, like say this, if you do it again, keeps the same rotation, same scale, same everything. It will only duplicate whatever you just had the options for. So it just makes it easier for when you're applying stuff into a level.